You hypocrite you, implying that readers are just humble worker bees. And I thought, how very Miss Casey of her. Welcome back to the You Are breakdown. If you missed part 1, it's up here. Watch it so you will get what I'm talking about. And now let's get back to chapter 1, which is called Name, Name, Go Away. We've already discussed name as a theme and how it appears in both the show and the book. So if you want to learn about that, watch part 1. But there are a couple of teeny tiny details left that I wanted to point out in this chapter. And one is, so am I proud of my surname? The answer, which is yes, may surprise you. And I have to ask you, if you are a native speaker of English, is this an odd structure to you as well? Or is it just for me as a non-native speaker? Because he uses this structure a couple of times. And I guess it's just within the character of Ricken. But I just want to make sure, if you can confirm it in the comments. And then there's a line that is also in the show that goes, all creatures, from the leaping cat to the cowering shrew, think of themselves as you, a logical center for the universe. And every time I see the word you with capital Y in this book, I cannot help but think of the show, you know? But that's unrelated. Chapter 2 is quite interesting, and I have not mentioned anything about it in the other videos. One sentence that probably has nothing to do with the rest of the chapter, and that simply took me out of the story, is the touch of Mother Nature's mossy flesh, which made me think of Woe's Hollow in Season 2, Episode 4, when we get Dieter's story, and we learn that towards the end, Dieter is turning into the forest. It's probably unrelated though. And since here Ricken is talking about a past event, he mentions when and where this event took place, which was several springs ago. And I noticed this because if you remember, in the show we only see winter, except for episode 7 in season 2, in which we get flashbacks of what looks like spring. And so I was wondering, are we only gonna see spring as the other season? And if so, what's the meaning behind that? And he mentions spring twice in the book, the second time talking about a 10-day retreat of global thought leaders in the moth fields of Spain, which took place last spring. And then Ricken talking about Mark, who in this book is called Flip, writes, Flip in particular tired quickly, and then his more frivolous supplies. And later, Flip, of course, made a joke of it all. And you can really see in every single chapter in which Flip or Mark is mentioned, how Ricken thinks so little of him, long before he joins Lumen. And Mark does the same. As I told you in part 1, there are a couple of sentences that actually make sense or that are not as unrealistic as you would expect them to be, written by Ricken, such as, it was a rare moment of spiritual quiet in a deafening world. And I thought, fair enough. I mean, we would all benefit from this. And now he begins telling us about the core of this event for him, and he writes, we came upon what appeared to be an elderly woman's powdered wig. And then he starts talking about this and going with his imagination until Devon says, okay, Ricken, honey, that's a beehive. And then he adds on the pages, in my defense, I'd never seen a non-industrial beehive before. There are a couple of potential references to bees or beehives in the show as well, but these are really borderline because we see the word beehive in season 1 episode 8, but it's just one of the commands. It doesn't necessarily have any repercussion, or not one that we can see in the show, not yet. even though we can assume what it does. And then there were some people talking about bees or beehives in season 2 episode 9, when we see that stunning shot at the end of the episode with the fireplace behind Miss Cobell, and someone said it resembles a beehive. I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, maybe I missed something, I don't know. But then let's keep going with the bees and other possible references or meanings, at least here in the book, not necessarily in the show, because Ricken starts thinking about bees, and he writes, thoroughly convinced of the dire importance of their work, how like human beings they are, I thought. And as I read this, I thought bees are more human than innies, or rather, we see how little people think of the innies, specifically with Miss Huang, Drummond, and others, whereas here he is comparing human beings with bees. But we also hear, as I pointed out in the language analysis of the show, Drummond is telling Milchick
to remember these severed workers' greater purpose.
And he keeps going. To wit, human laborers may yearn to drop their ballast and skip about with the frivolity of their overlords, without ever grasping that they themselves are the most vital appendage of the greater organism, or hive, that is mankind. And this is a bit like innies, who are at the center of Lumon's experiments. And towards the end, as he did with most chapters, he asks that you simply transcribe this poem onto a paper scrap of your own and add it to the vanity, because as even the humble worker bee understands, a vital part of being the you are is remembering the they were, implying that the readers are just humble worker bees. And there is a direct reference to this episode in which he finds this beehive in the show at the end of season 1, when he thinks he's talking to Auntie Mark and says, you know, I was scrolling through old pictures this morning and I found one of the 4 of us on the crest hike. You remember the funny bees, which of course Innie Mark cannot recall, but it's the only direct reference to this episode.
At the center of industry is dust.
We've already talked about several interesting quotes from chapter 3, which is called Good God, but here there's yet another example of Ricken's character when he writes, which I consider to be the most over-celebrated piece of commercial cinema ever produced. And this was a reference to Sister Act, which he used to talk about religion. And again, all I can think of is that his work, Ricken's work, is over-celebrated in this fictional world of Severance.
They cannot crucify you if your hand is in a fist.
Then we have chapter 4, which is called A Coitus Among Us, which again, as I told you in part 1, go ahead and read it because I'm not going to share anything else from that chapter. Then in chapter 5 we have the poem, and that's all there is in the chapter. And the following one is called Wait, What Was That? Because in here it talks about the poem. But there is an interesting paragraph I want to point out, in which he writes, repetition and subversion is a stratagem long employed in military circles, which only breached the literary world in the past few years, and then specifies, the basic notion is that one sets up a pattern, repeating it enough times as to lull one's enemy or reader into a sense of calm before breaking it suddenly and dramatically. And again, if you missed my language analysis of the show, I highly recommend you watch it right after this one, but we discussed cult manipulation techniques, and this one would fit perfectly in there.
My failure to break into the literary world in my 20s was devastating, yet it taught me a vital lesson, that it was not me who was wrong, but literature itself.
In chapter 7, we see that interesting confrontation between Mark and Ricken, and you notice in here how much Ricken cared for Gemma. And see, for example, here, I'd come for a cassette tape. I'd gifted her a self-produced Tuvan throat singing album, but she found something to compliment in every track. That's just how she was. And I thought, how very Miss Casey of her. And maybe this is a stretch, or again, I've been in the Severance world for too long. Possibly. And then he says, poison made of words, but perhaps we can temper its potency. And I mean, temper the potency of something? I see you. And chapter 8 is probably the one I hated the most. It's called Pull Up a Charity. And here he says that charity transcends race, class, sexuality, and U-type. And it's funny because he's already inserting his U-types in the real world, as if his classification was actually used in the real world. And this is a little side note, but it sounds just like the MBTI or other personality tests you can find online, which are not reliable or based on any science actually. And yet I honestly took the MBTI, and it's just a fun activity. There's nothing else behind it, even though some people truly lean into that. And if the U-types weren't decided by Ricken, they would actually be nice. I mean, they would be harmless, just like the MBTI. And then he continues talking about this charity and says, how dare I accept such abundant praise, whilst others go with so little? How might I share this acclaim that the literary world has gifted me? He really uses every single occasion to point out how successful and popular and beloved he is, and his work is so wonderful and everybody should read it. And then something that really shocked me. He writes, thankfully, I have not had to put personal funds into the accolades experiment, which is this charity, which is financed through donations and government grants. You hypocrite, you. This book is elevated rage bait. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is a quite recent phenomenon in social media in which people make videos just to make other people angry or to annoy them or to make something that really doesn't make sense, so that people will stop, watch the whole thing and give them money, but also comment. And it doesn't really matter if the comments are negative, as long as there are comments and there is engagement in their videos. But the strategy is so sick and it simply shouldn't exist. And yet it works because people get mad about stuff, whatever it might be. And this book is elevated rage bait because it's still subtle when it wants to be. It's still meant for Severance fans who I believe are at least educated or intelligent people, you know. And yet it still makes me mad. It perfectly works, that's the point. And then he keeps talking about the charity and writes, funds on a laptop computer to help with travel bookings. It will be so much easier, Dr. Ricken. And this was a request by his assistant. Travel agents don't correspond by mail anymore, and my hand is sore from all the writing. So here we have two different elements. One is a hint to technology and the fact that it seems like Ricken doesn't appreciate technology and doesn't want to work with it. But the second element is this hand sore from all the writing, which reminded me of Allentown, the room on the testing floor where Gemma, or rather one of her innies, is forced to keep writing thank you cards in that Christmas nightmarish setting. And there's another reference to Christmas, or maybe it's a stretch again, when he says, visited in my dreams by the ghostly visage of Florence Nightingale herself, which made me think of The Christmas Carol, the book. And then he continues, all travel correspondence will be handwritten, as Miss Nightingale intended. Again, Gemma's nightmare of having to write everything by hand, but also as whoever intended reminded me of
the way that Keir would have wanted.
Which is what Mark says to Hale. And it's the same concept that we hear multiple times, that
this could be the start of us uniting the departments, the way Keir always intended.
Keir would have wanted, intended, or meant something, and that they are supposed to follow his teachings. And at this point, you have to put something different on your vanity, according to Ricken's instructions. He writes, then, once your licensing paperwork comes in, affix it to the vanity amongst your other totems, which is quite the opposite of what one should do with charity. I'm not saying you should hide it, but you certainly shouldn't put it on vanity in a shrine. And then he drives me mad because he says that if you don't manage or don't want to make your own charity, you should donate to someone else's. And then writes, the back flap of this book includes instructions on how to give to the accolades experiment, as well as a tiered list of prizes you can receive in exchange. $300, for example, earns you a wool muff, hand knit by Balfe himself. All prizes come with a bespoke mounting cord, making them easy to hang upon the vanity. And he keeps sounding to me like a guru or an MLM rep or the most annoying human being, to be honest. I mean, to add insult to injury. And Balfe is the same assistant he was talking about, who asked for a laptop and who was suffering, and poor creature whose hands are already in pain now has to hand knit your prizes.
He's gonna be so excited.
Yeah.
I hope he comes home early.
He's not going to.
These are all the chapters that we get in this release, and at the end of this PDF or audiobook, you have two more small sections. One is a follow-up from the author Ricken Hale, and the second is about the author. And in the follow-up, which I already mentioned in part 1, we read, I apologize for any agony caused by the delay of the complete work, since this is just an excerpt and not the full version that Inez read in the show. And then there's the line that I already read in part 1, and he continues, I would also recommend taking time off work until the book is released and you can ingest its themes in full. And I thought, who has the time for that? And since you've been making your vanity along with the book, in theory, he also gives you instructions for that. Furthermore, assuming you have been mounting the totems as instructed, please cover your vanity in a bedsheet or tarp until such time that you can continue.
Say a secret, quickly. The fetus is drawn to clear air. Purging secrets can create a soul void that speeds the labor.
And finally, we have the About the Author mini section, talking about Ricken, which reads, Beloved author and enigma, Ricken Laszlo Hale has continued to awaken minds with such revered works. And then, Hale has persevered to become the foremost voice in the field of social wisdom. Quote, Rebecca Gulk, Ricken is more than a man. He's a writer. The books come from him. No Ricken, no books. Which to me is eerily similar to a sentence that Trump would say.
I love you, and I feel hurt that you haven't called me to thank me for the book yet. There.
Throughout both videos, I used some random quotes in between sections, which I called WTF quotes. And let me give you one more WTF quote, which is from season 1, episode 1, when Ricken says,
I'm making all the bed sheets myself.
So I won't finish with the big one from some time.
But the twin is comfortable, and the pajamas were made on a Baltic hand loom, so you'll sleep well.
And Devon goes,
Oh, Ricken's colleague told us that switching out the beds as the child grows can wound that child.
Irreparably.
but if you provide said child with all its beds upon birth,
You allow it to progress across the room at its own rate.
and then Devon says, let's go, and Ricken says,
Sweet dreams.
Thanks.
which made me think of Dr. Mawa saying to Gemma, dream sweet.
Had to drown out the memory of mom and dad switching out my beds when we were kids.
And now let's read together a couple of short reviews of the book itself, written by fans of the show. Absolutely hilarious. If you love Severance, this is a must. The writing is genius and had me laughing the whole time. The fact that it's available read by Ricken is chef's kiss. And I can confirm I listened to the audiobook first and then I read the written text, and he really adds to the experience. Concerned. This book changed my life, but I'm a bit worried I'm not supposed to have it. The orange cover doesn't match the handbooks and there's no Lumon logo on it. And this person really leans into it because this book is meant for fans who really want to go deeper into this world, but who are also perfectly aware that this is complete nonsense, and this comment is perfect. My innie and outie loves this. I'm a servant worker at Lumon, and they tell me that my innie just loves this book. Weirdly enough, I took that recommendation from myself, I suppose, and this outie gets the appeal. Ricken's voice is like smooth jazz in a field of green grass, and each page I enjoy equally as the last. Great work. And so many more keep playing around with the themes of the show. Say, for example, page 197 slaps. Please try to enjoy each fact equally and not show preference for any over the others. A feast of true frolic. Praise Kia. For my innie, the show is great, the book is self-centered, confused, and funny as I thought it would be. Love it. And some are more detailed than others. I won't read everything, but you can pause and read them yourself.
Your job needs you, not the other way around.
Whether Ricken is a fraud, a prophet, or just a guy who loves the sound of his voice, his words somehow mattered. If you read The You Are, please leave below the quote that really stuck with you. I couldn't cover every single word written in this book because of copyright, of course, but feel free to share whatever you thought was interesting. All sources are linked below, so if you want to get your copy, just check my description box. And now that you watched this, check out the video on the screen and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss my upcoming videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.